All right, so this is second lesson of Paul versus Plato. Gospel preacher owns pagan genius. One of the main reasons that I want to do this, one of the main uses that I think of this kind of study is we're trying to separate out, when we look at around us at the ideas in our culture, we're trying to separate out the Christian ones from the pagan ones. So, when we go back to Paul, when we go back to Plato, we sort of go back to the pure forms of Christianity and paganism. Paul, obviously a pure Christian in his writings. Plato, pretty much, as far as we can tell, unaffected by Christian or Jewish ideas. So we sort of have a pure form of each. And so if we find an idea only in Plato and not in Paul, it's a pretty good indication that that is not a Christian idea. By the time you get into like the Middle Ages, you start looking at Augustine, say, or Justin Martyr, or somebody like that, you start to get a mixture. People try to start putting the two together, and then it gets really confusing. So, Paul versus Plato. You know, I was looking at this picture of Paul. He's got and when I was looking for a picture of Paul, on just Googled it, they all have a sword, and I don't know why. I don't know if it's because he was originally a persecutor and then became. Usually, he's got a book in one hand and a sword. So I don't know. Maybe somebody knows, but. So this is our lesson plan. So last time. Lesson 1, we looked at the manuscript tradition for each guy, and we saw how Paul has a much superior manuscript tradition to the point where we actually know what Paul wrote. Plato, it's a little more questionable. And then we looked at the foundations of government, so or what gives the government its power according to each guy. Does someone want to throw out there, what's Plato's theory of government authority? Where does it come from? Right. Or there's a certain name for it, though. His particular theory of where it comes from. Social contract, exactly. So it's the agreement, the voluntary agreement of people, right? Okay, so this time we're going to look at justice and social transformation. So what does the government do with that power, then, is the question. Or what would a just society look like? And everybody pretty much agrees that the current society, wherever you are, the current society is not good. The question is, what do you change it into? And then once you figure out what that is, what justice looks like, then how do you go about changing it into that? What's the mechanism that you would use to change it? So we're going to start with Plato, then we go to Paul. That's our format. So again, Plato writes in dialogue, so you got two guys talking. Usually one guy's doing most of the talking, the other guy's saying, yeah. That's a lot of how it is. But some parts you get more back and forth. But in the really long dialogues, usually it's just the other guy agreeing. So this is from the Republic. This is one of the most famous dialogues of Plato. If you read something in school, it's probably going to be from the Republic. Or else, what's the other most famous one? Does anybody know? There's two pretty much that are the most famous. Can anyone think of any other dialogue? Not even the classically educated people? Surely. Well, the dialogues are all of them. That's the whole collection. It's Phaedo or Fido. Ever hear of that one? No? John has. John's educated from public school.
John is self-educated.
That's true. Anyway, that's the one where Socrates is talking before he's executed. Okay, so this is from the Republic, Book 2. I started this quote last time, so I read some of this last time. This is about Plato or Socrates presenting what would the ideal city look like. All right. So how does it get started? Socrates says, I think a city comes to be because none of us is self-sufficient. But we all need many things. Do you think a city is founded on any other principle? No. Socrates. And because people need many things, and because one person calls on a second out of one need and on a third out of a different need, many people gather in a single place to live together as partners and helpers. And such a settlement is called a city. Isn't that so? It is. And if they share things with one another, giving and taking, they do so because each believes that it is better for himself. That's right. Come then, let's create a city in theory from its beginnings, and it's our needs, it seems, that will create it. So there you have that. We're all going to come together because of our mutual need, and we're going to make an agreement, and that's how we get a city. Okay, continuing then. Socrates says, surely our first and greatest need is to provide food and sustain life. Certainly. Our second is for shelter, and our third is for clothes and such. That's right. How then will a city be able to provide all this? Won't one person have to be a farmer, and another person a builder, and another a weaver, and shouldn't we add a cobbler, and someone else to provide medical care? So what do we have there? What do we call that when one person does one thing, another person does another thing? Specialization or division of labor. Exactly. So that's the foundational principle of this city, of how a city should be organized, right? So the essential minimum for a city is 4 or 5 men. Okay, so I'm going to stop there. He goes on, and the city keeps getting bigger and more complicated, so I'm going to summarize the argument from here, because it goes for quite a while. So next he says, okay, a small city where everyone is content with a little would be best, right? But nobody's content with a little, right? So all men desire luxury, and so the city's going to grow and diversify until it needs to take land from its neighbors, right? And it's going to need to defend itself since they're also going to be growing and trying to take land from it. So we have a conflict now. So, by the principle of division of labor, the state needs to have a warrior, ruler, guardian class. Somebody who specializes in keeping the city safe, right? So we go back to our foundational principle of division of labor. But, so now, in addition to being a spirited warrior toward the enemy, the guardian has to be gentle toward those at home, right? If they start turning on their own people, that would be bad. So they got to be able to distinguish between them. So in order to distinguish, he needs to know the difference between friend and foe and know what is good to be done to each. So then the key thing for a guardian or a ruler would be knowledge, right? Well, who are the people that know things? What's the study of knowledge is philosophy, right? So since knowledge is the key for a guardian, he needs to be a philosopher. You see the logic there? Kind of makes sense. Yes?
Knowledge is science, or science is knowledge. So what would you say is the difference between science and...
Well, you got to remember, back then, they didn't have this division between science and philosophy. So if you read the ancients like this, they use science and philosophy largely interchangeably. So they'll say something like, cobblery is the science of making shoes, but philosophy is the science of sciences or something. It's the study of knowledge itself, something like that. See what I'm saying?
The overall general.
Right. Something along those lines. Though there wasn't this really a break. Like Aristotle was a philosopher, but he also wrote his longest work on plants and what's it called? I forget what it's called, but anyway, it's on zoology and biology and that kind of thing. But that was considered philosophy. Anyway, the point is, if we're going to have a rational society here, according to division of labor, we're going to have the rulers be philosophers. Okay, so then what is justice? So we sort of got this kernel of an idea of a city. So now we're going to move, that was book 2 of the Republic. Now we're going to move to book 4. This comes from the end of book 4, where there's been a long, complicated discussion, an argument about what justice is, but this is the summary. This is the conclusion of that whole argument. So Socrates says, in truth, justice is, it seems, something of this sort. However, it isn't, I skipped something. There we go. Okay, sorry about that. Socrates says, then the dream we had has been completely fulfilled. Our suspicion, with the help of some god, we had hit upon the origin and pattern of justice right at the beginning of founding our city. So he's referring back to the section we just read before, back in book 2, at the very founding of the city. Glaucon says, absolutely. Socrates says, indeed, Glaucon, the principle that it is right for someone who is by nature a cobbler to practice cobblery and nothing else, for the carpenter to practice carpentry, and the same for others, is a sort of image of justice, and that's why it's beneficial. So you see, he's going back to that division of labor, which is how society is structured, and he's saying that's a healthy society, so that's what justice is. Goes on. And in truth, justice is, it seems, something of this sort. Now he's going to, one of the principles in book 4 is he takes the ideal city and he says, and he compares it to the ideal person. So what he's going to say here, you got to think about it. He's saying justice in the individual needs to correspond to justice in the society. So listen to what he says here. However, it isn't concerned with someone's doing the right or doing his own work externally in the society, but with what is inside him and with what is truly himself and his own. One who is just does not allow any part of himself to do the work of another part or allow the various classes within him to meddle with each other. So he divides your internal self into your mind, which is the philosophical part, should be the ruler. Then you've got your emotions, which is, your emotional part. And then you've got your baser passions that need to be controlled most of all. So you've got 3 classes. And then he thinks there's 3 classes in society too. So he puts himself in order, according to these classes, is his own friend and harmonizes the 3 parts of himself like the 3 limiting notes on a musical scale, high, low, and middle. He binds together those parts and any others there may be in between, and from having been many things, he becomes entirely one, moderate and harmonious. Only then does he act. Okay? Continuing. And when he does anything, whether acquiring wealth, taking care of his body, engaging in politics or in private contracts, in all of these, he believes that the action is just and fine, that preserves this inner unity and harmony and helps achieve it, and calls it so, and regards as wisdom the knowledge that oversees such actions. And he believes that the action that destroys this harmony is unjust, and calls it so, and regards the belief that oversees it as ignorance. Well, that's absolutely true, Socrates. Well then, if we claim to have found the just man, the just city, and what justice is in them, I don't suppose that we'll seem to be telling a complete falsehood. So you see how knowledge, order, harmony, rationality all go together. Injustice, inharmoniousness, confusion, mixing of classes go together over here in Plato's system. So justice is harmony in society, and it's harmony in the individual, right? And just like your philosopher mind is supposed to rule over the rest of your body and bring it into order, so the philosopher king rules over society and brings society into order. Okay? So how do we get from one to the other? Because we don't have a rational society right now, so how do we get there? So what's the mechanism of transformation? He deals with that in book 5. So Socrates says, there's one change that we could point to that in my opinion would accomplish this. It's certainly neither small nor easy, but it is possible. Well, what is it? Until philosophers rule as kings, or those who are now called kings, and leading men genuinely and adequately philosophize, that is, until political power and philosophy entirely coincide, while the many natures who are at present pursue either one exhaustively are forcibly prevented from doing so, cities will have no rest from evils, Glaucon, nor, I think, will the human race. And until this happens, the constitution we've been describing in theory will never be born to the fullest extent possible or see the light of the sun. It's because I saw how very paradoxical this statement would be that I hesitated to make it for so long. For it's hard to face up to the fact that there can be no happiness, either public or private, in any other city. Now, what's interesting to me is just to do a little criticism of Plato here. There seems to be a little inconsistency here because the philosopher is the one who knows how to do this, right? But it seems like he's saying the philosophers don't want to be kings, and the kings don't want to be philosophers. But the philosophers should be the ones who know what's good, and so they would want to be kings, and yet they don't, and they have to be by force. See that? But who's going to be forcing them if it's not the philosophers, because nobody else knows what's good? So it seems like his little plan there kind of falls apart on that point. But in general, do you see how the system sort of makes sense? If you define justice as order, if you define order as needing to be brought about by rational classes, ordering things according to division of labor, then unless you're going to make everybody a philosopher, which doesn't sound very practical, then you're probably going to have a couple elite philosophers who tell everybody else what to do. Okay, so to sum up then, according to Plato, the role and purpose of government is to promote the public good, right? That's how everybody comes together for the mutual good. So that's the purpose. Justice is keeping the state in harmony by making sure everyone does what he's most fitted for. Remember, keep the cobblers doing cobblery, keep the builders building houses, And whatever you're by nature most fitted for, that's what you're going to be doing. The mechanism of transformation, then, is the philosopher king. Kind of interesting how a philosopher would put himself in charge. I just kind of find that kind of humorous. That's the kernel, of the idea. What?
In contrast, though, self-government requires that we all become philosophers.
Right.
So that we're all guided by a higher philosophy.
Right. But how's that going to happen? Because most people want to be irrational. I'm guessing that's why Plato wouldn't have said that. That just seemed like a crazy idea. So how could you have a system where people would want to be rational?
A rational person would want to.
Right. Plato would want to, but what about the cobbler? But actually that's kind of, so now we're going to look at Paul. How could you have a system where individuals are transformed? See? Plato doesn't really seem to think that would be possible. He doesn't really deal with that idea. So what does Paul say? So we're going to go back to Romans 13. He says, "Let every soul be subject to the higher powers, for there is no power but of God. The powers that be are ordained of God." So we have the source of authority being God instead of the people. "Whosoever therefore resisteth the power resisteth the ordinance of God, and they that resist shall receive to themselves damnation. For the rulers," so they have their power from God. What are they supposed to do with the power? Right? That's what we're interested in. "For the rulers are not a terror to good works, but to evil." So the job, the role of government then is to bring terror on evil. "Wilt thou then not be afraid of the power? Do that which is good, and thou shalt have praise of the same. For he is a minister of God to thee for good. But if thou do that which is evil, be afraid, for he beareth not the sword in vain. For he is the minister of God, a revenger to execute wrath on him that doeth evil. Wherefore, ye must needs be subject, not for wrath only, but also for conscience sake." So, Plato says civil government needs to order society, bring it into harmony. Paul says they need to execute wrath on evildoers. A little bit different. But what's the evil? Like for Plato, good and evil is harmony or disharmony, rationality, irrationality. Is that what Paul means? Is he executing wrath on people who make logical errors? Let's see. "For this cause ye pay tribute also, for they are God's ministers, attending continually upon this very thing. Render therefore to all their dues, tribute to whom tribute, honor to whom honor, custom to whom custom, fear to whom fear. Owe no man anything, but to love one another, for he that loveth hath fulfilled the law. So we have the concept of law. That doesn't really show up in Plato's theory. Like the philosophers make laws, but the law's not above it comes from the rationality, right? But here we have a law, a different kind of law. For this, thou shalt not commit adultery, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not bear false witness, thou shalt not covet. And if there be any other commandment, the whole rest of it, the law, it's briefly comprehended in this, namely, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. So the 10 Commandments, which come from God, they were delivered to Moses on Sinai, right? Moses didn't cook them up in his mind. That's the definition of good and evil for Paul. Totally different than Plato. Okay, so that's what justice is. How would we transform society into something where people don't kill and lie and steal and all that? Well, here I'm gonna borrow a little chunk out of your playbook, Joel, and go to Titus. One of themselves, even a prophet of their own, said, the Cretans are always liars, evil beasts, slow bellies. So what do we do with these people? How do we change them? This witness is true. Wherefore, what do we do about it? Rebuke them sharply, that they may be sound in the faith. So the mechanism for changing them is rebuke them or preach the gospel to them, tell them what they're doing is wrong, tell them the way of salvation. They need to repent, on the one hand, leave their evil beast, slow belly stuff behind, and become sound in the faith. So you see, it's the gospel, repentance, and faith that is going to transform Crete, not a philosopher king, right? Okay, now this is not from Paul, this is from Matthew, but given that this is the Great Commission, which was Jesus' instructions to all his disciples, I think it's fair to bring this in here. I think Paul would have agreed with this. And Jesus came and spake unto them, all power is given to me in heaven and in earth. Go ye therefore, teach all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost, teaching them to observe all things whatsoever I have commanded you, and lo, I am with you always, even to the end of the world. Again, he doesn't tell them, go become kings, so you can order society. He says, baptize people. That's something you do to individuals. And you teach them to observe the things that they've commanded. So you're starting with the individuals, a bottom-up transformation, and you're transforming the whole of society, ultimately. Okay. From Acts, let's see Paul in action. So Paul actually did this. So how does Paul go about transforming society? Acts 17, and Paul, as his manner was, went unto them, and 3 Sabbath days reasoned with them out of the Scriptures, opening and alleging that Christ must needs have suffered and risen again from the dead, and that this Jesus, whom I preach unto you, is Christ. So he's preaching the gospel. This is in Thessalonica. And some of them believed and consorted with Paul and Silas, and of the devout Greeks a great multitude, and chief women not a few. So we got a pretty big movement going on here. But the Jews, which believed not, moved with envy, took unto them certain lewd fellows of the baser sort, and gathered a company, and set all the city on an uproar, and assaulted the house of Jason, and sought to bring them out unto the people. And when they found them not, they drew Jason and certain brethren unto the rulers of the city, crying, this is interesting, these that have turned the world upside down are come hither also. So these, Paul and Silas, had a reputation for turning society upside down, transforming society. And now they've come here and they're doing the same thing here. But what were they doing? What were they actually doing? They were preaching the gospel. They were changing people's minds. Henry. Right. Right. Yes, that's a good point. Henry says that this whole situation was very inharmonious. And so Yeah, according to a Platonic view of government, this would be something that should be stamped out immediately. But it wasn't unjust what they were doing. What they were doing was just, but it was causing disharmony. Okay, so Paul, on government then, the role and purpose is to fulfill its ministry from God. Justice is executing wrath on evildoers. And the mechanism of transformation is the gospel, repentance, and faith. So, if we put this all together, this is my little comparison chart. So, remember I said Paul and Plato, there's a certain superficial similarity. If you read, you will hear statements that sound Christian when you read Plato. So, superficial similarity, the state is to establish justice. They both agree on that. Until you realize they mean different things by all those words than each other. Justice is different, the way you establish it is different, and even the very concept of the state is different. But they would kind of agree on that. But the source of authority then, the commission of God for Paul, agreement of the people for Plato, that's a social contract idea. The purpose of government, enforce God's civil law for Paul. We saw that in Romans 13. Or for Plato, promote the public good. The definition of good, what is good in society? For Paul, it would be honoring God by keeping his laws. For Plato, it would be order and rationality producing maximum collective happiness. Right? That's why everyone's coming together in the first place, so we can all be happy. But we're going to do that by order and rationality, or division of labor, right? The definition of civil justice for Paul, that is following God's laws for the state. For Plato, keeping the state in harmony by making sure everyone does what he's most fitted for. Definition of personal justice for Paul, following God's laws for the individual. For Plato, keeping the soul in harmony by making sure each part of it is staying in its place. So that's why Plato would say, you should be temperate. You shouldn't get drunk because when you get drunk, it clouds your mind, and your mind is the most important thing. You got to stay rational. The mechanism of transformation for Paul, the gospel, repentance, and faith. For Plato, the philosopher king. And then down at the bottom here, first principles. One of my purposes, I want to try to show how all this goes back to where you start in your philosophy. So for Paul, you start with a personal God that makes laws. And if that's the case, all of this follows logically from that. For Plato, he starts with abstract ideas of the good. What I mean by that is, if you would reflect on it and think about it, you can make a logical system that all fits together in your mind. The world only partially conforms to that. So your goal then is to take what's in your mind, what you figured out in your mind, the ideal world, and transform the material world into that ideal. We're going to get more into that later. But if you take that idea, all of this kind of makes sense. If it's just an impersonal, abstract idea, you've got to figure out a way to transform the world into that. A philosopher king sounds like as good a way of any as doing that. And if you have no better thing in your system to think of than happiness, if you don't have God, like our ultimate purpose is to bring glory to God, but get rid of that idea, what do you have left that could be your ultimate purpose? Well, some form of personal happiness, right? And then you got to figure out a way to achieve that, which harmony and order sounds like a decent way of achieving that. So what I'm trying to do is show you how the whole system kind of makes sense in and of itself. The point is not that Plato was stupid. He was brilliant, but he started from the wrong place. Okay. So then, if we take those two systems, let's think about our own society. How do we relate to those, and which ideas come from where? So I got some. Here's the question, my discussion question for today. The modern social justice movement, is it more Platonic or Christian? So I'm going to throw out an idea on this, and then you guys we can discuss it. So just think about this for a second. Social justice, in my analysis, is basically the idea of equal outcomes enforced by the civil government in some way. We're going to all have the same level of wealth or level of honor or respect or something, and that's going to be, the government is going to make sure that happens. Okay, so we've got an ideal of equality, and we've got a way of achieving it, being the government. So the idea of equality, maybe we can disagree on this. I'm not sure if I'm right about this, but it seems to me the idea of equality does not usually come from paganism. I can't think of a place where pagans believed in equality. We do find equality in Christianity. Equality under the law, we see that clearly in the Mosaic Code. And equality at the Lord's table. We all come neither bond nor free, man nor woman, all of that. We're all equal before Christ. So what I suspect is that social justice uses a mutated form of Christian equality. If you think about Plato's society, he's all about classes, right? You do not find the concept of equality, at least I haven't found it, in Plato's writings. Okay, so we got a mutated form of equality, but then we are using the state to transform society into that. That sounds to me a lot like Plato. We're going to use the philosopher king to transform and order society. So anyway, my analysis is we've got a pagan mechanism enforcing a mutated Christian ideal. But let's hear some thoughts on that. Joel and then Dan.
And that idea of equality, I think you're dead right. I don't see myself either. Any idea of equality originating from pagan thought. In the modern sense, you have Cromwell, for example, saying, I'm going to take farmers and regular Joes, if you will, and we're going to make an army out of them. As I understand it, that just hadn't happened too much before. It came from more privileged classes, at least in the West. Mm-hmm. So I think you're dead on. I think you're dead on with the idea that it comes from the social justice movement. The equality idea is a perversion of something that has its source in Christianity. Again, I just don't see any place else. Just very quickly, I have a question for you. Can you go back one slide?
Yes.
Okay. I won't take too long on this. If I do, I can sense your class going from 6 weeks to maybe 12. But your Plato there on the right, my Christian nationalist friends, mm-hmm. I think they'd be pretty good with everything that's on the right under Plato. The only difference is they want Christian philosopher kings.
Right, a Christian.
Yeah, he's got to be a philosopher Christian king or
right.
Christian philosopher.
Right.
Otherwise, I think what you have on the right is would be pretty much consistent with what I understand is in the Christian nationalist movement.
Did you hear them talk a lot about the public good more?
All the time. All the time, public good.
Yeah. And you don't find that really in the Bible, I don't think, as an ideal. It's when throughout the Old Testament, when God has a complaint, it's not like we don't have the public good going on, it's that you broke my laws, right? Yeah. Dan.
So I would say that the answer to the question is neither, because Plato believed in individuals fulfilling.
The answer to what question? The social justice question?
Is social justice Christian or more Christian or more Platonic?
Yeah.
And I would say it's neither, because Plato believed in specialization of labor, division of labor, and so there are different classes, the philosopher being above everyone else. And then Christianity, we have equality, but what our woke culture is pushing now is equity, where the government imposes by giving people unequal treatment to achieve an end.
Right. The similarity I see, though, is that in the social justice movement, the whole thing is framed in terms of classes. So it's not so much that they've gotten rid of the classes as they're trying to squash them all together in a certain way and make them all have the same outcome, but we're still to all think about ourselves either as white or black or whatever. So in that sense, right, I don't think Plato would have thought much of social justice. You're right in that sense. He would have thought it was a stupid idea. But more because he would have said, what's this idea of equality? Then, put those people down there, where they belong. But yeah, he wouldn't have agreed with it. Marty and then John.
Just a quick comment, Conrad. In the beginning, you were, with the dialogue, you were stating that Plato saw that the city is formed by these people coming together and being able to provide for each other, and I see like an overlap with that with our thinking that we should serve our neighbor, right? And I saw that in the sense of him saying that you need a builder and a cobbler and so forth, and so what he was describing was things occurring voluntarily. So all this in my mind, like this jump to where the mechanism for the transformation is the philosopher king.
You think there's a little inconsistency with his first principles
it's
there?
a big jump. Yeah. So.
That's true. And also the idea, this gets into a little bit of like the libertarian idea that all this can happen voluntarily. That society can all be ordered according to self-interest, I should say, is different than the Christian idea of serving your neighbor. Like the motivation for a good Christian should be as much service to others as self-interest. But in Plato's ideal, it's not about, the division of labor is not about me serving my neighbor better. It's about me getting more stuff and being more happy because we split it up. But Christy?
I wonder whether the social justice movement more comes from Platoism, because the way I've run into it with the people I work with and just in general is that they do not actually object to the social strata classes. They just object to where they fall on it.
Okay.
And it seems to me that they are co-opting Christian language to try and get Christians to buy into their movement. But what they're really trying to achieve is somebody to change their own place. That
Right.
the white people have been too long at the top, so we need to, I want to be at the top.
Right.
Or women want to be at the top, or whoever it is, and you end up with more of this situation like an Animal Farm where all animals are equal,
Right.
but some animals are more equal than others.
That's right. Yeah, I think it is a farce in the whole thing, because it's just like communism in that maybe the original idea, or at least Leninism, what you ended up with was the vanguard elite, they were called, that were going to go in and sort of like the philosopher king, and then but then they ended up just being the pigs and taking charge. And actually, it's kind of interesting. I was just this week reading, later on, there's another long dialogue like the Republic. It's not nearly as famous, called The Laws. It's a little more pragmatic than the Republic, or less idealistic. And in there, he was specifically saying, what we need is basically a tyrant to start with, and then he needs to hand it over to a more a less coercive form of government later on, which to us sounds totally stupid. But you can see he's realizing, yeah, there's a problem here. How are we going to make this happen? So he came up with a solution. Did you have something to say?
So this particular chart really seems to lay out a difference between force and liberty. I want to back up a little bit. I think that Plato's, if there's an idea of equality, it's equality of happiness, equality of harmony, that he's looking for everybody to be equally happy to have a harmonious society. Right. But his means of bringing about are by force.
Right.
And so the question you're asking about our government is that through regulatory agencies and et cetera, the government is attempting to enforce equality, enforce harmony. A cobbler might be very, very, very good at being a cobbler, but he might want to be a carpenter. And in Christianity, he could go do that.
Right.
In Platonic society, he would be forced
Right.
to be the cobbler because he's more efficient or effective at being the cobbler.
Yep.
And so everything we're looking at here, there are so many parallels between things that you were talking about with division of labor and economics. Adam Smith's invisible hand.
Right.
You had referred to in one of the dialogues. It said that people would be doing this, but there's also a mechanism of the hand of God involved in their doing it.
Right.
How
did mention God.
Yes. How did it naturally arise that this society had 5 people and they all did 5 different things? Maybe they all wanted to do the same thing.
Right.
But in Platonic society, you're going to have to force it.
Right.
And in all of these things here, because the motivation is internal and God is enforcing the harmony, he's enforcing the harmony of your will with his will because of the preaching of the gospel and the conversion of people, and it has to be imposed outside.
There's a uncomfortable undertones of tyranny in the Joel.
Yeah, I've wondered from time to time who was the first who had the first idea for video games.
Okay.
And I think I've found them. It's definitely Plato, the originator of video games, no doubt. Here's what I say that. I used to play this. The only video game I ever actually beat was called Lords of the Realm. Okay. And you had to organize your society. It was very Platonic.
Okay, I see.
And when you needed more miners, you just went to your wheat farmers and just grabbed more miners, made them miners, right? No problem, right? And if you need more people to work in the, in the dairy farm, you just grab more people out of the quarry and put them in there, right? And then it all came. Nobody had any will of their own. It was just you. I was the philosopher king. Right. And then I drafted them when I went and put my army when my neighbors wanted to come and kill me. Yeah. I think Plato originated the game, Lords of the Realm. It's perfect for him.
He would have played that 5 hours a day probably.
It's the whole game is like that. It's the most purely Platonic thing. After hearing this, the other thing is, would you mind just very quickly going back a few slides to the one where he talks about?
Are we in Plato?
Yeah. Where he talks about overseas, he believes the action. Okay, there we go. Yeah, that one.
This one?
Yeah, second to last sentence or the last sentence. And he believes that the action that destroys this harmony is unjust, and calls it so, and regards the belief that oversees it as ignorance. Right. That is the argument I get at abortion clinics all the time. No. Kill the baby. I mean, not even arguing anymore that it's a life. They barely argue that. Sometimes they do, it's rare. They admit it's a life, but it's destroying their harmony.
Oh, yeah.
And the baby existing is unjust. Downright Platonic argument.
Right. Yeah. Very good. There's one comment I want to make, just in case someone accuses me of misrepresenting Plato on the idea of equality. He does have a sort of a superficial proto-feminism in his writings, where the guardian class is supposed to be men and women equally, and they're both supposed to be soldiers together and stuff. And yet it's very superficial in that once you dig into it a little bit, you realize the women are still basically like the best warriors. Well, the women have to fight at the back, and not because they're not because they want to take care of them, but because they don't want to lose the battle. For whatever reason, he wants them there, but they have to be out of the way. And then the best men, the very best male warriors, get to sleep with as many and whoever they want, so they don't really get equal choices there. And any time that Plato wants to, well, when we get to the reincarnation idea, the irrational men get reincarnated as women. Anyway, all that to say, there is some like notions of equality there, you could argue, but it's very superficial. Did you have something else to say, Dan?
Yes, Joel talking about his video game reminded me that there's a major difference between communism and Christianity in regards to people or individuality. And that is, when Nimrod was building his Tower of Babel, he built it of bricks, which are all man-made and which are all alike and interchangeable with each other. But when God makes us, we're like rocks. We're all individual. We're not interchangeable. We're specialized as parts of the body of Christ.
Right. That's true. Yep, that's true. All right, unless someone else has something burning to say. All right, Wes, that'll be the last one.
Thank you, Conrad.
Yes, I expect you to remember this.
Yeah. I guess it seems like everybody's understanding, getting to what I'm about to say, but I think, Karl Marx would not have a problem with this chart either. You know what I'm saying? If he read through this, keeping people in there. I mean, the biggest class guy in history is probably Karl Marx. Mm-hmm. I do believe that our society is Platonic, is the result of a Platonic philosophy. And anytime somebody uses the word, any pagan who uses the word harmony or justice, I mean, Christians should be red flag instantly.
Right.
You know what I mean? This is scary when he starts talking about harmony, because we all know how they're going to achieve harmony and justice is by murder and theft. Right. That's how they're going to achieve their harmony. Right. Killing and murdering and stealing from their neighbors.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Thank you. All right. Thanks everyone for your attention, and we'll pick up next time with a very unique theory of education. So you're going to want to hear that.